Welcome back to session 2 of the environmental policy course, the part that focuses on environmental communication in changing social and behavioral aspects of human behavior. We will be zooming in today on a model provided by the Dutch Council for the Living Environment. It was introduced already in session 1. The central question that we're looking at is how can government policy make effective use of behavioral insight? Social psychology is a big part of that in order to encourage people to make environmentally responsible choices and to behave in a more sustainable way. We've already touched upon some basic insights in the other sessions. For one, the behavior of others can stimulate or encourage sustainable behavior. This has to do with the social norm, but also examples that we see around us that can trigger or encourage us to kind of mimic that behavior. Unsustainable behavior is often due to habit. It's what we're accustomed to do. It's our usual routine. It's something that's been encultured throughout our lives. Oftentimes, it's something we learned at home. Making sustainable behavior attractive and the easy option is as the default, the new normal is what we need to be doing in order to create a culture of sustainable behavior. At the moment, often living sustainably is made difficult and living unsustainably is made easy in a way. Spatial planning and appropriate technologies can help in aligning the behavior of citizens with the environmental objectives that the government establishes or that communities themselves establish. Different societal groups or actors will require different types of policies, and within those, specific approaches will need to be designed to take into account differences in socioeconomic background and in living conditions and environments, cultural aspects that might be different. So you need to take that into account when deciding on your policy and the approaches within them. And finally, another insight is that if you give feedback on the effectiveness and the impact of the changes in someone's behavior, that can help encourage or sustain that behavior. When you see the impact of your solar panels on the roof on CO2 reductions or on maybe even changing your energy behavior at home because you feel that you've earned that energy yourself and you have produced it yourself, then you also might be more likely to waste less energy at home. But you need technology to see that impact, and smart meters can do that, but you can also connect your cell phone to your solar panels and check the productivity. The model provided by the Council for the Living Environment starts with a number of questions. There are basically 4 key questions that I will touch upon here. One, what is the environmental or the societal problem in the current situation? Why is it a problem? And what's the evidence base that it is a problem? Are there some scientific measurements or facts that show that this is actually detrimental to the environment or to biodiversity or to public health or to climate urgency, climate change? What are the causes and effects that can be identified? For instance, if the government wants to curb CO2 emissions because climate change is seen as a problem, or maybe also in general air pollution as a public health issue, then the problem has to do with air quality, and it has to do with climate, and it has to do with public health. And there are many causes and effects that can be identified, and there's a lot of scientific evidence that these problems exist. Then the next question is, what type of behavior is relevant to this problem? If you want to curb CO2 emissions, you could look at, of course, you can look at the way energy is generated. For instance, looking at coal burning facilities and try to close them or make them more efficient. But that's not something that is affected directly by our own behavior at home or in our own work environments, in our own working behavior or professional behavior. Or in our everyday life, personal lives. So you might, if you want to look at human behavior, focus more on, say, reducing mobility by car. Um, and then the behavior is the behavior or the habitual behavior sometimes of people choosing to drive their car to work, the commuting behavior. That would be the specific behavior you might be focusing on, how to minimize car travel, or maybe to have people share cars. Or so there are lots of options once we have identified the behavior or the shift in behavior that we want to achieve. The third question has to do with the policy objective. What do we want to achieve? What is the desired behavior that we are trying to reinforce here? Are there already groups in society that show this behavior? We might want to look at if we, let me go back here. If we do want to change behavior and reduce the amount of car use, we could look at different options that affect different behavioral components, so to speak. For instance, if we want to have a shift from individual use of cars to car sharing, that affects different kinds of behavior than when we want to say get people to shift from car driving to public transport, or maybe consider shifting from fossil fuel driven cars to electric driven cars, which might also be fossil fuel driven depending on where the electricity is generated, of course. But that's a different kind of shift in behavior from, say, switching to carpooling. Carpooling will affect, for instance, one's attitude towards sharing, one's privacy. Some people may value privacy more. Others may like the social aspect of sharing a car. Some people like to plan carefully their day and don't have a lot of flexibility, so they need to be there on time, and then they do not want to depend on the driver who might be a little bit late, and whereas others are more flexible. And this has to do, and of course there's also opportunities may be different for carpooling depending on where you live. So the circumstances and conditions have also a strong influence on that behavior. But the key is that we need to identify the key behavioral components that influence the desired shift in behavior. Now, the model by the Council for the Living Environment, which is in a way based on a much older model by Arjen and Fishbein, which goes back already more than 30 years, distinguishes between a person's abilities, a person's motives, a person's conditions and circumstances, how they make decisions about what to do, and eventually, if they change behavior, what their evaluation is of the effect of that behavior. Does it make them feel better? Do they see results? Does it improve their lifestyle, their quality of life, their economic situation sometimes, which is important for certain people who have a more kind of a homo economicus attitude, rational efficiency, maybe not so much concerned about environment and long-term sustainability, but more concerned about short-term economic gain. Whereas others who have more maybe a biocentric perspective and value nature and have a concern for the future, have environmental awareness, they might be more sensitive to the sustainability argument. So different people may have different motives for changing their behavior. And sometimes it's a mix of all these things. Here's the same model, and you can dissect these different components. The motives have to do with one's attitude, with one's beliefs, with one's awareness of the problem that is at stake, one's values, the social norms, but also the belief that you can make a difference, self-efficacy. The circumstances have to do with the technological capabilities, possibilities, the social and cultural backgrounds of people, but also the institutional, economic, and physical conditions. If you do not have, if you live in a high-rise, separating your waste might be more difficult because the infrastructure is such that it's kind of a hassle to take it down with the elevator, maybe 9 floors down, and then separate the waste. If it were designed in a way that you could go to the end of the corridor and then have different chutes for the different types of waste, it would be a lot easier. The circumstances would be much better for separating waste. And then there's also your knowledge and your own skills and abilities to display that behavior. If the government wants to encourage that people who have short commutes consider an e-bike, then it does require that you have a certain fitness and that you are able to do that, and that also the conditions are such that the bike paths are safe and available, and so on. And then on the other side of the model, you see the choice processes, how people make decisions. Some people are very rational; they reason everything in their behavior. Some people are very much in habits of mind, and they don't like change and they resist it. Others are kind of intrigued by change and trying things out. And then there's also intuitive behavior, where people don't reason and rationalize, but they have a feeling that it's the right thing to do, or it's what is expected to be done, and it feels right to them. It has more to do with intuition than with reasoning, and that all combined influences their willingness and their ability to change their behavior. And once they change that behavior, they will evaluate whether it makes them feel better, whether they feel it contributes to the goal that they are sympathetic to or that they want to strive for. And that evaluation will lead to a strengthening of that behavior, or it can lead to a weakening of that behavior. When there's no effect and it takes a lot of effort, then people might slide back into their old behavior. There's another effect that as one experiences with this new behavior, it also can improve your abilities. So this was in a nutshell the 4 questions that we need to consider when we start utilizing behavioral change models in influencing human behavior to become more sustainable, and an introduction to the different components of environmental behavior that we need to consider when designing a communication-based strategy. In the next session, we will focus on the model itself and the different steps in the model and the different policy tools that we can use. Again, if you have questions, post them in the Brightspace virtual classroom, and we will have a conversation, hopefully, about some of these issues and maybe go in a little deeper.